my colleague Monica. She's the director of the programs and the projects unit at Maat for Peace Development and Human Rights Association. She's the director of Peace Builders in Egypt, which is a project by Maat and working in collaboration with KIC. And this webinar is part of this project. She is very specialized in combating hate speech and participated in a lot of related projects in Egypt, Poland, Greece, and also Germany. Good morning, good afternoon, Monica. We hope that all. We hope. I think you will start. Monica, please, from your point of view and your experience, could you tell us more about the relationship between hate speech and the spread of terrorism, or through your experience with Egyptian youth, how can they see hate speech and its impacts on their real life? Please, you have the floor for 15 minutes.
Yeah, thanks to you, Abdulrahman. As you know, and all of us know, that hate is moving into mainstream in liberal democracies and authoritarian system alike. So it's not related to the type of political system, but it's related to the political discourse and societal discourse that promoted hate speech in it. So it's a global and a cross-border phenomenon. And with each broken norm, the pillars of our common humanity are weakened. Hate speech, as well as terrorism, is meant to democratic values, social stability, and sustainable development and peace. So today, and through this webinar, as you asked me, I would like to raise some points of discussion related to the relationship between hate speech and the spread of terrorism by application on the Egyptian discourse. But we need to stand on a base that we all agree on that. The respect of human rights, and including right to freedom of expression, including to the right to freedom of expression should be promoted and respected while combating hate speech and violent extremism. Hence, addressing hate speech doesn't mean limiting or forfeiting freedom of speech. It means keeping the freedom of speech, or it means keeping hate speech from escalating into something more dangerous, particularly incitement to discrimination, hostility, violence, which is all prohibited under international law. So we have today a recurring question is whether the occurrence of extreme events offline systematically triggers bursts of hate speech online, indicating of peaks in the volume of hateful social media posts. So, and also the offline causes contributed hugely to increasing hate speech online as its open space. So all persons are behind the cameras, so we are not facing each other face to face. So people can be more encouraged and motivated to feel free to easily practice hate speech. So we need to agree on that what's happening offline affects what's happening online, and the vice versa. So we cannot deal or try to counter narratives of hate speech offline without trying to solve the situation online, or the vice versa. And so to understand the relation between terrorism and hate speech, we need to explain or clarify 3 points. First of all, the definition of hate speech. Second, the types of hate speech. So when hate speech can be turned into terrorist acts, and what are the criteria that should be measured to know that in this case, the hate speech will turn to terrorist acts. So there is no general or one agreed definition to hate speech, but we can define here hate speech according to the UN Action Plan on hate speech. So according to the UN, hate speech is any kind of a communication in speech, writing, behavior that attacks or uses pejorative or discriminatory language with reference to a person or a group on the basis of who they are, or like their identity factors. So in other words, based on their religion, ethnicity, nationality, race, color, descent, gender, as I said, any identity factor. So we can sum up that hate speech can be conveyed through any form of expression, including images, cartoons, memes, objects, or samples. That's why it's easily more spread on online and social media platforms. Hate speech can be disseminated offline or online, as we said, and with regard to behavior, it's important to distinguish hate speech from hate crimes, as well as from acts of discrimination. That's why we first define what is a hate speech. So to understand more the types of hate speech, and according to this action plan, there are 3 levels of hate speech: top level, intermediate level, and bottom level. The top level, which is the highest and dangerous level, that may be turned or could turn it into terrorist acts. So the top level is a direct or indirect incitement to commit genocide, any advocacy of national, racial, or religious hatred that constitutes incitement to discrimination, hostility, violence. But to say that in this level, the hate speeches or practiced hate speech is turning into terrorist acts, their incitement requires a triangle relationship between hate speaker and the audience and target group. So there should be hatred feelings between the hate speaker and the target group. And the hate speaker is like a well-known that the likelihood of the audience being incited to an act of discrimination, hostility, or violence. And then I encourage or I advocate of hatred based on protected characteristics that will direct my speech to the audience. And there is accusation between public audience and target group, which is here the actions happen, or like the acts of imminent danger of acts of discrimination, hostility, violence, terrorism can happen. So the criteria, which is the next point that we can be measured here, is the context of expression, it's a speaker and their intent, who are practicing this speech and what are their intents, the content and form of these speeches, the extent and magnitude, and lastly, the likelihood of the people, like our public audience, including incitement of actual action against the target group, the periods that follow the declination, for example, of Muslim Brotherhood, that can prove later on this when we apply on the Egyptian discourse. And exactly, like I first clarified this, because when we are going to talk about the situation in Egypt and after the declination of Muslim Brotherhood in 2013, we can find this triangle incitement between the public audience, the hater, and the target group. But I would like to very quickly mention the other 2 levels, which intermediate levels, that certain types of biased expression that may be restricted by laws to pursue a legitimate aim, such as the respect of the rights of others, so including the right to equality, non-discrimination, or the protection of public order. And also another form of hate speech that can be considered under the intermediate level, which is protect individuals from hate speech based on their protected characteristics or identity factors. And lastly, the bottom level, which must not be restricted legally, it like contains expressions that offensive, choking, disrupting, denial of historical events like genocide, like Armenian genocide, for example, or crimes against humanity, including also insult to religious feelings, lack of respect of religions, or other belief system. So unless such of expression also constitute incitement to hostility and discrimination or violence. So here, like the incitement is the indicators that we can use. So by talking about the Egyptian situation, we can see that in the period that followed the declination of Muslim Brotherhood from the ruling of Egypt, which is in 2013, which is classified as terrorist, like the Muslim Brotherhood is classified as a terrorist in Egypt, terrorist group in Egypt, especially the last 4 years, has witnessed a number of incidents from which can infer the existence of some hate speeches in Egyptian society in line with the raising of number of terrorist attacks against Egyptian civilians. So here in the Egyptian discourse, the hate speech of political Islam currents represents the bridge that links them to groups of violent extremism and terrorism, where hate as a principle, essence, and vision is an inclusive and important link between political Islamic group like Muslim Brotherhood and between those terrorist groups like the ones that we have in Sinai, for example, Beit al-Maqdis, Ansar Beit al-Maqdis. So terrorism and hate speeches of political Islam currents represent the basis on which terrorists and extremists build their vision of legitimacy of their violent actions and practices. These visions also allow these groups to coordinate and ally themselves together, as we have seen with the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt and with the other terrorist groups in Sinai. Then they practice terrorist attacks in the Egyptian community. So we can take some real examples of accidents and attacks that happened in that time in Egypt. So we can found an alliance and coordination called the National Alliance to Support Legitimacy. And here by legitimacy, they are referring to the legitimacy of their political system at the time, which is the ruling of Muslim Brotherhood to Egypt, which collapsed after the 30 June revolution. These alliance included some leaders from the Egyptian Islamic group who have restricted their views and welcomed violence and confrontation, waging war on post the June 30 state. At the same time of they are doing so, we witnessed a huge wave of terrorist attacks against Egyptian civilians in Sinai by Ansar Beit al-Maqdis. So Brotherhood leader Mohammed al-Biltagi, for example, practiced hate speech from that kind of top level when he said that in Rabat Square that when the escalation of terrorism and terrorist attacks in Sinai will be like keep escalating until the Egyptian people prevent from back from the revolution. So with such kind of hate speech, and there is a direct incitement to the people who have a highly likelihood to practice terrorist and violent attacks, and they practice it already against Egyptian civilians in the later time. So in addition to the expansion of the area of terrorist operations to exact from the Sinai, so they are not only practicing their terrorism in Sinai, but also in the valley and the delta and in the capital of Egypt. So with increased rates of violence, we can see here the rate and high numbers of terrorist attacks that Egyptian community faced. The number of terrorist operations, for example, during that period, 4th of July 2013 till 7th of June 2014, reached about 222 terrorist operations. And these operations were characterized by their strength, breadth, and diversity of targets. So one of prominent accidents or incidents that happened that we are feeling so sorry for it, Sheikh Zouaid on 11th of July 2013, which was the first attempt to target a military leader in the Egyptian army, then come to the largest terrorist operation in terms of the number of victims, which targeted 25 officers and soldiers on 19th of August 2030, which was known as the second Rafah Massacre. And terrorist operations varied during that period to include most of the governorates of Republic. So that reached to 1,003 operations, or the total terrorist operations that occurred during the second constitutional phase in the period from July 2014 to January 2017. So like the hate speech that practiced at that period time, it's not only against the political symbols or like the Egyptian army because it belonged to the political system, but there are incitement to religious hatred. So they are like considering that the Coptics are a part of this revolution, so you'll practice hate speech against them and motivates the Islamic extremist groups to practice violence against them. So for instance, in 2013, there are 115 incidents of sectarian violence against Christians were documented, including 82 attacks on churches, and in addition to 7 Christian schools and 6 Christian NGOs, including 2 medical centers, and burning 7 service buildings, attacking 10 homes of Christians, clergy. So it's not only the buildings, but like the people in human way. This violence has continued in November 2018. 7 people were killed and 13 injured in attack against a bus transferring Coptic in Mina. Many causes of sectarian violence across the history differ from coordinated terror attacks to mob assaults. So lastly, as we see, the terrorism is often an upward crime involving a perpetrator from lower social standing than the target group. In contrast of hate crimes or disproportionality down crimes, usually entailing perpetrators from belonging to the majority or powerful groups in society and minority group victims. So, however, there are fight and there are many mechanisms that follow to reduce or to fight against hate speech and against the terrorist attacks on the ground, but the online hate speech is keeping to escalate the situation and to harden and to obstruct these efforts. So among the cases that represent a flagrant incitement to hatred, it's like a tweet from Wagdi Ghunaim, as we see in the slide here. A hate speech in the name of religions from the Egyptian preacher residing outside, maybe in Turkey, and I don't know his place now, who was consistently incited hatred and violence against the Egyptian army, police, and Christians in the Egyptian community. Among these opinions is that the later wrote on social networking site Twitter, he called for to go out in his demonstration as he considered a goal to establish the caliphate worse than hate speeches broadcast by Ghunaim, usually against them. Like he's motivating the young people online to go to make the violent extremism in the reality, and to attack Christians, and even like he mentioned that in his tweets, if you do so, it's fine. If you going to prison because those acts, it's fine. God will reward you later because you are doing something good for your religion. So now the Egyptian authority and the Egyptian government, in coordination and in partnership with Egyptian civil society and like all parts of Egyptian society, they are working together to improve the situation, to fight against terrorism, and to counter narratives of hate speech. And that's like make a difference, to be honest, as we see the numbers here in the slide, that if we followed the years, the number of terrorist attacks in each year, we can see the difference. Like 39 terrorist attacks in North Sinai alone within the 2 weeks, only 2 weeks, there are 39 attacks happened after Mohammed Morsi ousted from power. 222 terrorist operations in 2014, the most prominent, as I mentioned, one, and 594 terrorist operations during 2015, and 199, and here we can see the declination in the number of the operations by time, happened in 2016, 50 happened in 2017. In 2018, we can see only 8 operations, Lastly, in 2019, we can see only 2 terrorist operations, the bombing of Oncology Institute, which killed 19 people and injured 30 others. So there are like national efforts and also goes online with the international efforts, as we have this UN action plan on hate speech. We have the fraternity document, humanity document, وثيقة الأخوة الإنسانية. And also there are papers that published by our colleagues in Maat that talk specifically and in details on the paths and mechanisms for combating hate speech in Egypt. I would encourage you to read, and I put its link in the slide here, and I can send it also in the chat box. And I bring some recommendations from the papers that, like, I feel if it's going to be applied in the reality, it will make a difference as well. So they recommend us to initiating a law to combat hate speech in the name of religion in line with Article 53 of the Constitution and the international treaties ratified by Egypt. Secondly, they recommend us to the need, and they are highlighting the need to consider establishing an independent anti-discrimination commission as stipulated in the Egyptian Constitution. Thirdly, amending the penal code to provide deterrent criminal penalties for the committers of discrimination against the religious component of Egyptian society, intensifying awareness campaigns among young people to promote coexistence, tolerance, acceptance of others, renounce violence and hatred, and spread the values and principles of religions and accepting others, as I said, as stated in the national human rights strategies that published recently. So at the end, I would like to thank all of you, and not to be like taking so many times. I'm sorry if I was like in long speech, but we always need to remember that all together. Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. And hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that, as Martin Luther said. So thank you for all. And I would like to answer any questions if you have, or maybe we can gather the questions at the end of the discussion.
Only love can do that. It can be a song, by the way. Thank you very much, Monica, for your presentation. You tackled a very important points about hate speech in Egypt in general, and especially online hate speech. And I wanted you to maybe conclude the recommendations at the end of the webinar, but it's okay. Thank you very much. I just want you in 1 minute tell us about the project that Maat is working on with CAICID. How can we consider it as a tool to face the hate speech especially inside Egypt? In 1 minute, please.
Yeah, the project that we are implementing in cooperation with CAICID is like relying on a perspective that highlights that young people are not bombs in our society. Young people are effective tools and like factors in our society who can make a difference positively. So we are working on 2 different pillars of capacity building. So we provide them with a training on hate speech, what is hate speech, and how we can promote the counter-narrative campaigns against hate speech and violent extremism. And then we give them the space to apply initiatives, grassroots initiatives, to combat and confront hate speech in the Egyptian society. So in this phase, we will going to provide support, financial and technical support to 6 initiatives, and maybe more we can see in the coming days, that promoted by young people, Egyptian young people in the Egyptian society, to combat hate speech and violent extremism.
Very well. Thank you very much, Monica. Please wait for us. Thank you. Monica.
Yeah, Abdurrahman.
I know that you worked a lot on UN Security Council Resolution 2250, which is targeting the youth and peace and security. So how can we use this resolution as a start to, not as a start, as a tool in our struggle in combating hate speech?
Yeah. The UN Security Council Resolution 2250 is like, which is turned to Youth Peace Security Agenda, UPS agenda. So the core value of it, like from my point of view, is as Pwaza mentioned, is the bringing youth on the table. So involving youth in the policy making decision and in the peace building process. Not only as a targeted for the peace building trainings, but like in the forming and formulating these programs, in the negotiations about peace buildings, in conflict resolution, in the conferences, and etc. Building their capacity, as I told you before, it's not looking to the young people as like the target of terrorist groups who can be like a bombs in our community, but as a positive actors who make a difference and who can develop and achieve progress to our community. So bringing them on the table, publicizing such kind of resolution and agenda and formulating programs for young people and that promoted by young or by youth, that targeting youth and that implemented by youth. And lastly, we can also use the UN Security Council Resolution 2250 as a tool by publicizing the resolution in the national context. So we can see national strategies focusing or building on this resolution. So we have some countries that adopted national strategies for young people and the role in the peace building. So we can be like following the steps in that way, so we can have such kind of programs to young people and make a difference by it. And also, I want to refer to something that Rosalia mentioned in her presentation as well, as about the focusing and highlighting the role of young people. So it's not only to work for young people or with young people, but as I told you, to bring them on the table. So the G20 Interfaith Forum is one of the very popular forums about the role of religious leaders and the policy making and the decision makers and policy makers, leaders of the countries, institutions, NGOs, and etc. And there also the young people have a participation in this interfaith forum. And I was lucky to participate in this forum in this year in 2021 in Italy, and we had a side event on the role of young people in the Arab countries in peace building process and comforting and combating hate speech. So such events we can use as a space, as a safe space for the young people to combat hate speech and to promote peaceful messages.
Very good question, very good answer. Thank you, Monica, very much for that.